The camera lights flickered on. Global Impact Forum, London, 2025. The audience inside the historic Royal Albert Hall buzzed with nerves. Royalty, diplomats, activists, influencers. The world had never seen a panel like this. Powerful voices from every corner of the globe gathered to talk about justice. President Ibrahim Traore sat still, calm. Sharp in his earth-toned suit, hands loosely folded. On his chest, a small wooden pin shaped like Africa. The young Burkinabe president had spoken in rooms like this before, but this was different. Across from him, Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, leaned into the mic. The co-moderator, elegant and poised. She glanced down at her tablet, then looked up. Her voice was soft but firm. President Traore, you've inspired many, but don't you think strongman politics is just patriarchy in disguise? You could hear a pin drop. Some winced, others froze mid-blink. The words had landed like glass shattering in a quiet cathedral. Traore didn't flinch. He simply smiled, a slow, quiet smile. Then he leaned forward. Power doesn't corrupt the African man, he said. Injustice does. The silence stretched until the first clap broke it, followed by another and another, until the room roared. But what no one knew, that sentence would change everything. Within 7 minutes of Traore's response, the internet exploded. Traore truth trended first in Lagos, then Cairo, then Paris. Within the hour, even Beyoncé had reposted the clip. But inside the venue, things grew colder. Journalists whispered. Meghan shifted in her seat, trying to move on. But the damage was done. Or perhaps the awakening had begun. As cameras kept rolling, a woman named Anaya, an African-British human rights lawyer seated in the third row, began to cry quietly. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he said injustice. Maybe it was the memories of her mother deported from the UK in 2004. Maybe it was the feeling that finally, someone said something that felt like her truth. In the backstage room, Meghan scrolled through her phone. She had meant no harm. The question came from the pre-approved script, but she couldn't shake the look in Traore's eyes. Dignity, depth, pain hidden in strength. Meanwhile, Traore sat in silence, not gloating, not smiling, just breathing. A staffer walked over, whispering that his clip had reached 4.3 million views in 11 minutes. But he didn't check his phone. He looked at the door, at the crowd, as if he could already feel the weight of what was coming next. That night, as Traore returned to his hotel, a handwritten letter was slipped under his door. No name, no envelope, just paper, folded neatly. He unfolded it slowly. My name is Adama. I'm 13. I live in Bobo Dioulasso. Today I saw you on YouTube. I don't have a dad anymore. He died in a protest. But when I saw you, I thought maybe we still have someone who will fight for us. Please don't stop. He read the words 3 times, then again, and he cried. Quietly, the way African men often do, in silence, with pride still standing tall. Elsewhere, Meghan sat with her team, combing through the reactions. She was shaken, not just by the backlash, but by her own heart. Was her question too sharp? Was she seeing something she had refused to see before? She opened her DMs. A message stood out. You came to moderate justice, but he came carrying wounds. Be careful when you ask lions why they roar. Back in Burkina Faso, Adama's mother covered her son with a blanket. You think he'll write back? The boy whispered. She didn't answer, but she hoped. She prayed that a man thousands of miles away would remember a boy in Bobo Dioulasso. It was 2:13 a.m. in London when Meghan's private line buzzed. She stared at the screen. Unknown secured line. She hesitated, then picked up. I wasn't offended. a calm voice said. Silence. President Traore? She asked, unsure. Yes, I didn't call to argue. I called because I believe people only ask tough questions when they still care. Meghan leaned against the wall. No cameras, no staffers, just one human to another. I think I wasn't prepared for your answer, she admitted. I wasn't prepared to be asked that question either, he said, with a quiet chuckle. She laughed, surprised by his ease. Traore continued, voice softer now. Do you know what injustice feels like, Meghan? It's not always screaming in the streets. Sometimes it's your mother skipping her dinner just so you can have one. Sometimes it's being told you're dangerous just because you refuse to kneel. There was a pause. Meghan swallowed hard. I've felt that, she whispered. Not in the same way, but I felt it. They didn't talk long, but when they hung up, both of them stared at the ceiling, 2 worlds apart, but suddenly connected by pain. And in the morning, Meghan did something no one expected. She posted the full unedited video, no PR filters. On day 2 of the forum, President Traore arrived wearing something unexpected. Old brown sandals, not the polished Oxfords he wore yesterday, not luxury loafers. People stared, the press whispered. But when he sat, he explained. These were my father's, he said during his keynote. He wore them when he walked 5 miles each day to teach in a village school. The year he passed, he gave them to me, not because they were valuable, but because they reminded me that the ground I stand on was paid for by sacrifices. The audience grew still. One UN ambassador from Brazil quietly removed his own shoes in respect. It wasn't about style. It was about the message. Even Meghan, seated nearby, looked down at her high heels. She whispered something to her aide, then took them off too. By noon, dozens of people in the crowd sat barefoot. TikTok erupted. Stand in his sandals reached 12 million views in 6 hours. Some cried watching, others just stared. But to a 13-year-old boy in Bobo Dioulasso, it meant everything, because those were the sandals his father once photographed before dying during a protest. Traore didn't know yet, but that boy's story was about to change his life. A young intern working for the BBC, barely 19, found the letter Adama wrote to President Traore. It had been accidentally dropped backstage when Traore passed it to a translator for help with the English handwriting. The intern, unsure what it was, snapped a photo before turning it in. By 3 p.m., the letter was posted online. It read like a prayer from a broken heart. You remind me of the fathers we lost, but you also remind us that not all hope is gone. You stood up for something. Please, don't stop standing. The letter spread faster than wildfire. In Burkina Faso, Adama's mother screamed when she saw it on her neighbor's phone. That's your handwriting, she cried. Within hours, reporters flooded their small compound, but Adama didn't care. He held his mother's hand, eyes wide. Do you think he'll see it? He asked. She nodded, choking back tears. I think he already has. That night, President Traore sat in his hotel, watching the clip of himself holding back tears as he first read the letter. Then he saw the viral photo. He stared at it for a long time. Finally, he whispered, Tomorrow, I'm telling the world who this boy is. Day 3 of the Global Impact Forum. The Grand Hall was full again, even more packed than before. The energy was electric, but quiet, like the air before a storm. When President Traore took the stage for his closing remarks, cameras zoomed in. He held a piece of paper, not a speech, a letter. He looked up at the crowd. His voice didn't shake, but it was lower, more raw. I want to end today not with a policy, he began, but with a name. His name is Adama. He is 13. He lives in Bobo Dioulasso. He lost his father during a protest for better schools. He wrote me a letter. And I want the world to hear it, not because I am a president, but because I, too, Am a son who once watched a father bleed for justice." The room stopped breathing. Traore read the letter aloud, every word, slowly. As he read, something happened. People began to cry. A Spanish diplomat dabbed her eyes. A young American influencer sobbed openly. Even seasoned journalists looked away from the camera to hide their shaking lips. And when he finished, Traore whispered, "This is why I fight. For children who still believe we can do better than this." Back in Bobo Dioulasso, Adama's world was spinning. First, the reporters. Then, the letter going viral. But what truly made his mother collapse in tears was the official knock on their door. Two aides from Burkina Faso's presidential office stood outside. One held a small flag. The other carried papers. "President Traore would like to invite Adama to London," one of them said gently, "as a guest of honor." The boy stood frozen. His mother gasped, "London?" They had never left their town. Adama had never even been inside an airport. 2 days later, barefoot and wide-eyed, he boarded his first plane. As the engines roared, he gripped his seatbelt tight, whispering a silent prayer in his father's name. Traore was waiting at Heathrow. No cameras, no speeches. Just one man waiting for one boy. When Adama stepped through the gates and saw the president, not in a suit this time, but in plain clothes, he ran forward and hugged him. Not like a fan, like a son who found a father. And Traore knelt, wrapped his arms around him, and whispered, "Your letter healed more than you know." The final panel session of the Global Impact Forum was underway. World leaders, CEOs, philanthropists, they all came to talk about the future of humanitarian leadership. But something felt different. At the back of the room sat Adama, dressed in a simple blue shirt. On his chest, a new pin matching Traore's wooden Africa. He looked smaller than anyone expected, but his eyes carried fire. Traore was invited to speak last. As he stood, he did something strange. He stepped aside and waved for Adama to come forward. Gasps echoed. Some thought it was a PR stunt. Until Adama opened his mouth. He didn't read a speech. He simply said, "My father died hoping the world would care. I think today he'd be proud. And to those in this room with power, please stop waiting for us to scream before you listen." He stepped back. His voice had cracked near the end. The silence that followed felt like thunder. And somewhere in the corner, Meghan Markle covered her mouth. Tears rolled down her cheek. Not just for the boy, but for the mirror his words had placed in front of all of them. Backstage, after Adama's unexpected speech, Meghan Markle sat alone. She had excused herself, claiming she needed to review notes for the closing segment. But in truth, she was trembling. Not out of shame, not out of fear, but because something in that boy's voice had shattered her. It was the way he said, "Please stop waiting for us to scream before you listen." Meghan thought about her own children, about the time she was told she was too ambitious to belong in the royal family, about how she had spent years fighting for women's rights, but had never truly asked herself what a boy from Bobo Dioulasso would want the world to know. She walked quietly to her dressing room mirror, stared at herself, and for the first time since the panel, she cried. Then she did something rare. She pulled out her phone, opened her camera, and hit record. Today, a child reminded me that leadership isn't about titles. It's about truth. I want to apologize, not just to President Traore, but to Adama, and to every child who's been asked to explain their pain to people too comfortable to hear it. She paused, voice cracking. "I hear you now." She hit post and walked out. Within minutes, Meghan Markle's emotional video swept across every major platform. Some thought it was PR damage control, but the rawness in her voice, the tremble in her lips, couldn't be faked. Meghan Markle and Adama Speaks began trending together. In Kenya, schoolchildren gathered around phone screens to watch. In Chicago, a black pastor paused his Sunday sermon to play the clip for his congregation. In Mumbai, a teenage girl used the audio for a TikTok montage titled, "Why We Still Fight." President Traore hadn't seen the video yet. He was with Adama in a private room, sharing roasted peanuts and laughing softly about how Adama had almost tripped walking up to the podium. But his chief of staff rushed in. "Sir, you need to see this." He handed over the phone. Traore watched, quietly. When it ended, he looked at Adama. "Sometimes," he said, "even the loudest voices need a little silence to find their hearts again." Adama nodded, and then Traore smiled. "Let's give the world something they'll never forget." The final evening of the Global Impact Forum arrived. Cameras were everywhere. Streets were flooded. People didn't just want policy updates. They wanted to feel something again. At sunset, a surprise announcement was made. President Ibrahim Traore and Duchess Meghan Markle would co-host a final segment titled, "When Power Listens, a Conversation Between Pain and Hope." No suits, no titles, just two chairs on a small circular stage. But when they walked out, they were not alone. Adama walked between them, holding both their hands. The audience stood, applauding long before a word was spoken. They didn't talk politics that night. They talked fathers, childhood, the silence between continents. Traore shared a story about hiding in a ditch during a coup. Meghan shared a memory of being the only biracial girl in a California theater class who was told to pick a side. Adama listened. At the end, a photographer, just a freelance rookie from Ghana, snapped a picture. Meghan wiping a tear from Traore's cheek. Adama resting his head on both their shoulders. 3 souls, 3 nations, 1 frame. That photo would later be titled, "What the Future Looks Like," and it would hang in the United Nations lobby forever. Early the next morning, as Adama prepared to leave London, he found a small wrapped box on the hotel bed. No note. Inside was something that made him gasp. President Traore's sandals. The same old brown pair he wore to honor his father. The same sandals that made diplomats cry. The same ones that had launched, "Stand in his sandals." Folded beneath them was a handwritten message. "Adama, my feet have walked enough. One day, yours will carry the world. Until then, may these remind you of where you come from and how far you're meant to go. IT." Adama clutched them to his chest and wept. He didn't feel like a symbol or a story. He felt like a son who was seen. Traore didn't say goodbye in person. He said he didn't want a crowd or attention. He simply whispered to Adama earlier that morning, "Lead with love, not anger. And when they doubt you, speak anyway." By noon, Adama's flight departed, and by sunset, the photo of the sandals beside the note went viral. Again. But this time, it wasn't about a president or a duchess. It was about a boy. And the world's hope resting in his footsteps. 2 weeks later, the British Parliament was in session, debating foreign aid to African nations. The usual arguments echoed. Unstable leadership. Corruption concerns. Western accountability. Suddenly a young aide rushed in, whispering into the ear of an MP. He stood. "I'd like to interrupt this discussion with something the world forgot," he said, raising a tablet. On screen, the now famous photo of Traore, Meghan, and Adama. The chamber quieted. The MP cleared his throat. "We sit here arguing over decimal points in budgets while a 13-year-old boy in Burkina Faso has done more to change hearts in this country than any of us ever have. When did we forget that aid isn't just about money, it's about justice?" There was a hush, then clapping, then more. Outside, citizens gathered, holding signs that read, "Let Africa Speak." Traore showed us how. We stand in Adama's sandals. And for the first time in over 2 decades, the vote shifted. Aid wasn't just approved. It was restructured, with direct youth-centered partnerships and public transparency. And that night, in Bobo Dioulasso, Adama sat under the stars with his mother and said, "Maybe Papa saw it all." On the eve of his return to Burkina Faso, President Traore stood alone on the rooftop of the London embassy. No cameras, no speeches, just sky. He looked up, then slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a photo of his father, faded, cracked. It was the last picture ever taken of him, standing barefoot in front of a chalkboard, teaching under a mango tree. "I did my best," Traore whispered. Then he turned and saw Meghan stepping onto the roof, wrapped in a thick coat. "You forgot something," she said softly, handing him a folded note. Traore opened it. It was from Adama. "Thank you for not being afraid to cry in front of the world. I'll never forget that." He swallowed hard. Meghan stood beside him. "You've changed things," she said. He shook his head. "We did." A meteor streaked across the sky just then. Brilliant, silent, gone in seconds. They both looked up. Two people once separated by culture, media, misunderstanding, now united by a boy's courage and a world's awakening. Meghan broke the silence. "What now?" Traore looked out over London. "Now, we go home and make sure this wasn't just a moment, but a beginning." Back in Bobo Dioulasso, Adama's mother, Aissatou, stood at the front of their small home, looking out over the dirt path that had been quiet for weeks. She hadn't slept much since Adama left. Even now, though the world knew her son's name, she still washed their clothes by hand and swept the porch at dawn. That morning she lit a candle by her husband's old sandals, the pair he'd worn to the protest that took his life. She knelt down and whispered, "You were right to believe the world could change. But I never thought it would be our son that made them listen." Tears dropped to the dusty floor. Outside, neighbors stood silently with flowers. Some had never even spoken to Aissatou before. But now they came. Not to gawk, not to take pictures, but simply to say, "Thank you for raising him." One elderly man placed a carved wooden figure of a lion by her door. "No one will forget him," he said, "and no one will forget you." She looked up, eyes shimmering, and for the first time in years, she smiled. Because sometimes justice doesn't knock. Sometimes it comes home as your son. A month later, Adama stood on stage in Ouagadougou, this time at a national youth summit. He wore a white shirt, the same wooden Africa pin, and President Traore's old sandals. The stage was big, bigger than London. But the audience wasn't diplomats or celebrities. It was kids. Children from villages who had never heard their names called over loudspeakers. Teens who thought leadership belonged only to men in suits or countries with glass towers. Adama cleared his throat. "People ask what it feels like to go viral, to meet presidents, to fly in planes. But I don't care about that." He looked down at the sandals. "I care about my mother's hands, my father's feet. I care about kids like me who think they're too small to matter. We're not." The crowd was silent. President Traore didn't give me power, he gave me permission. Permission to be more than a story, to be a bridge between forgotten places and the people who forgot them. When he finished, there was no applause at first, just tears, and then an explosion of cheers as children in the front rows jumped to their feet, barefoot, chanting, "Adama, Adama, Adama." 2 weeks after the summit, President Traore lit a ceremonial flame in the heart of Burkina Faso's capital. Not for politics, not for war, but for truth. Beside him stood Adama. Meghan Markle flew in quietly. No press, just her presence. Isatu, holding back tears, watched from the front row. Traore took the microphone one last time. Today, we light this flame in honor of those who never lived to see justice, to every father silenced, to every child unheard, and to every person brave enough to speak, even when the world told them to stay quiet. He turned to Adama, handed him the torch, and stepped back. Adama held the flame high, trembling, then lowered it to the base of the monument. The fire erupted. People wept openly in the crowd. And then, the national anthem played. But this time, even children knew every word. Because this wasn't just a song anymore. It was a promise. That truth would never again be a whisper. That pain would no longer be hidden. That leadership didn't always wear suits. Sometimes, it wore old sandals and walked barefoot through history. If this story made your heart ache, if it reminded you of your own forgotten dreams, your parents' sacrifices, or the silent struggles in your home, then don't just watch. Drop a comment below. Tell us what part touched you most. Like this video if you believe children like Adama deserve to be heard. And hit that subscribe button, because on this channel, we tell stories the world needs to feel. Let's keep this fire burning. Let's be more than viewers. Let's be the voice they never expected. Traore Truth, Adama Speaks. Thank you for feeling this with us.